Hello students, welcome back. This lecture for object-oriented programming in Java. So from this class we are going to start with the next unit, that is unit number 5. And in this particular unit we are going to discuss the concept of inheritance, then the different types of accessibility and the method overriding, right? So in the previous unit we have discussed one of the very important features of object oriented programming language, like we have discussed the constructor, then the different types of a constructor, and then constructor overloading, and then we also discussed the term that is the method, different types of the methods, and then method overloading, right? Then when you're talking about the object oriented programming language, so we said that the reusability is one of the striking features or the striking characteristics of object oriented programming language. And whenever we want to achieve the reusability in object oriented programming language, we use the concept that is called as inheritance. So in this particular unit we are going to look into this particular content, that is what how we are going to use the inheritance when we want to write the Java program, then how we are going to declare the derived class, then which are the different types of inheritances we are having in object oriented programming language or particularly in Java, then what is the member accessibility and how it is going to vary when we are defining the different access specifiers like public, private and protected. And finally we are going to look into the topic that is called as method overriding, right? So inheritance term is quite familiar to us, familiar to you all, right? Because whenever we are talking about inheritance, simply the picture which is coming to the mind, that is what a parent and the child relation, right? That whenever we are talking about child, so child is inheriting the properties of its parent, right? So this picture is saying it all, that what the inheritance means, right? So whenever we are talking about inheritance, so this is nothing but the relation. You can say we are having a grandfather, then from grandfather the father is get derived, then from the father the child is get derived, right? So what we can say is whenever we are talking about inheritance, it does mean that we are deriving something from something. Means there is a few things which is already existing, and from that existing thing we are trying to derive the new things, right? And this phenomena, that is deriving the new thing from the existing thing, that is nothing but called as the inheritance. And when you're talking about the existing thing and the new thing in object oriented programming language, then the existing thing is nothing but called as the base thing, right? Whereas the new thing which is the derived from the base thing or from the existing thing, then that new thing is called as either the child class or the derived class, right? So this inheritance is going to revolve around the two terms. The very first is the parent class or the base class, and second is nothing but the child class or the derived class, right? So every now and then when you're talking about the inheritance, so these two terms we are going to use much more frequently, that is the parent class or the base class and the child class or the derived class, right? So we'll see that what is the inheritance in Java, right? So as I said that whenever we want to achieve the reusability in object oriented programming language or reusability in Java, then we require to use the inheritance, or we can achieve the reusability by means of inheritance. So inheritance in Java is a mechanism in which one object acquire all the properties and behavior of its parent object. Or in other words, what we can say, that the new class or the new thing which is derived from the existing thing, so that new thing is going to acquire all the properties of the existing thing, right? And whenever we want to use the inheritance in Java, then we use one special keyword in order to implement the inheritance in Java, that is called as extends, right? That is what, when we are saying that we are writing the new class or we are writing the new thing from the existing thing, in that case the new thing is extending the feature of existing thing, right? And that way we use the extend keyword. That is, when a class extends the another class, it inherits all the non-private members. Now what is the private, what is public and protected, that we are going to see practically, that what do you mean by non-private members, including the fields and methods, right? Means whichever the thing we are declaring as a public and protected, those all the things can be inherited in the derived class or in the child class, because your child class is derived from the parent class. And whenever we are saying that child is get derived from the parent, so but obviously child is going to have all the properties, all the feature of the parent, and along with that child is going to build his own properties, own characteristics, right? So inheritance in Java can be best understood in terms of parent and child relationship, also known as superclass and subclass, that is a child class, right? And inheritance is basically defines is a relationship between the superclass or between the parent class and the child class or the derived class or the subclass, right? All these are the similar terms. Extends and implements, the keywords are used to describe the inheritance in Java, right? That is the two keywords we can use in order to implement the inheritance in Java. The very first is extends, right? And second is the implements, right? So when we are going to use the extends and implements, so that we are going to discuss later words. Then inheritance in Java, as I said, that it is going to form a user relationship between the parent and the child class. Then what is the need of using the inheritance, right? Because in the first unit we talked about the difference between the object oriented programming language and the procedural oriented programming language, and also we try to highlight the lacunas or the limitations of procedural oriented programming language, and we prove that what is the need of object oriented programming language, right? So one thing is quite clear: in order to just overcome the limitation of procedural oriented programming language, we require the object oriented programming language, right? And when I'm talking about object oriented programming language, inheritance is one of the powerful feature of object oriented programming language, right? So when to use the inheritance? So whenever we want to achieve the method overriding, the overloading and overriding both are the different terms, right? So we are going to talk about what is method overriding and how we are going to achieve it whenever we are talking about a programming stuff, right? So we are going to see this thing practically, so don't worry about it. Then its main use to enable polymorphism, that is what act of representing more than one form, or in other words you can say the reusability, right? Whenever we want to achieve the code reusability, then but obviously we are supposed to use the inheritance, right? Then this is what the picture which is going to represent you what is inheritance. That is the parents, we are having a father and mother, and when the child is get inherited from the parents, so it's getting some properties from the father, is getting some properties from the mother, right? So that's how the child is get inherit. Then there are certain few important points which we have to remember whenever we are talking about inheritance in Java. That key again, as I said, key whenever we are talking about inheritance, we are going to revolve around the two things, that is the base class or the super class or the parent class, and second thing is the child class or the subclass, or you can say the derived class, right? So inheritance, the class which is given the data members and the methods, is known as the base or the super or the parent class. The class which is taking the data members and the methods, that is what the class which is derived from the parent class, is called as sub, derived or child class, right? Then the data members and the methods of a class are known as the features of that particular parent class, okay? And the concept of inheritance is also known as reusability or extendability of the existing class, right? So how it is that we are going to see with the help of some example, and these are what the terminologies which we are going to use whenever we are going to talk about the inheritance, right? That is inheritance, then the subclass, also called as a child class, also called as a derived class. Then we are having a super class, also called as a parent class, also called as a base class, right? Also called as a superclass, right? Then the keywords which we are going to use in order to implement the inheritance in Java, that is very first keyword is extends and second keyword is the implements. Then this diagram is representing that what do you mean by inheritance. So when I'm talking about student, teacher and doctor, right? So all these three different entities, that is student is also a person, teacher is also a person, doctor is also a person, right? So in order to form this student, teacher and doctor, so but obviously they should be a person first, right? So we can say that student is a person, teacher is a person, doctor is a person. So that is how we are forming the is a relationship, right? Second example, if I'm talking about line, circle and triangle, so all these are nothing but the shape, right? So what we can say that shape is my base class or the parent class, and from parent class I'm going to derive some properties, and I will extend some properties in order to draw the line, in order to draw the circle, in order to draw the triangle. Then yes, sometimes you may get the question like this, or you may get the question represented like this, that is the diagrammatical form, right? Whereas such a diagram is called as the class diagram, right? This rectangle or this square box is representing the class diagram, in which we are going to divide this particular box into the three parts, right? Whereas the upper part is going to represent the name of the class, that which class you are supposed to design, right? Whereas the second block of that particular box is going to represent the data members of that particular class, and the third box or the third field of that particular box is going to represent the member function, right? So that is how you can get the question as well. There may not be the statement that what class you should write, what are the data members, what are the member function, right? The same thing can be represented like this in this particular diagrammatical form. So you should able to understand that what exactly program or what exactly you're supposed to do, right? So if you can just go through this particular diagram, so one thing it is quite clear, that person is what your parent class, and this from person we are deriving the student, we are deriving the teacher, we are deriving the doctor, right? Whereas for this particular box we are having the class name as a person, we are having the data members as a name, age and gender, and we are having the member function as eat and walk, right? Whereas this student is get derived from the person. So if I'm talking about the relationship between the student and the person, so the person is the parent class and student is get derived from the person, so student is my child class. So but obviously when I'm talking about a base and the child class, so this child class is going to inherit all the properties of the base class, that is student can have all the properties of the person, right? And in order to inherit the student from the person, so we are supposed to use the keyword, that is the extends keyword. That is, this is for this particular block the class name is a student, data members are program and study year, and your member functions and study and held exam, right? And suppose if I am creating the object for the student, right? Let's say I have created the object like student s1 equals to new and student constructor, right? So by means of the object of the student, I can call the data members and the member function of the person. Means without creating the object for the person, if suppose the student is inheriting from the person class, so by means of having the object of the student class, you can inherit the properties of the parent class, right? Likewise, we are having the class as a teacher, we are having a data members as a designation and salary, we are having a member function as a teach and take exam. Similarly, we are having a class name as a doctor, again we are having a data members as a designation and salary, and we are having the member function as a checkup and prescribe, right? So this is what one way to represent your no inheritance, right? That this representation is nothing but called as a class diagram. Then I'm just going to the second example which we have talked about, that is what the shape, right? So again it is almost same as the person class which you have talked about. Again we are having a parent class, we are having certain child class, right? Then shape, then circle, line, triangle, like that. So this is what is a relationship. So this diagram is quite clear, it is not difficult as such. Then when you're talking about inheritance, so we have said that the use or the importance of the inheritance is the reusability. That is the main purpose of inheritance is the reusability. Means we are having a parent class, we are having a child class, so child class but obviously is going to have all the features of the parent class, and along with that the child class can add its own properties or add can new things to that particular class. So we can easily add the new classes by inheriting the from existing classes. Select an existing class, close the desired functionality, create the new class, inherit the properties of the base class, add and modify the inherited functionality. So that is quite clear, we discussed already, right? So likewise, no shape we are having, let's say I can add new features to it. So the moment I am adding the new features to the parent class, so all these features is accessible to the child class. So we do not need to modify the child class, we are only modifying the parent class, and those things will be available to the child class as well, right? So that is the beauty of this particular thing. Then again, this is an example reuse, that how we can use the reusability stuff. Then now the very important, that how we are going to use the inheritance in Java, right? So when we are talking about inheritance in Java, so in order to implement the programs for the inheritance in Java, we are supposed to use the two keywords. The very first is extends and the implements, right? So whenever we want to apply the inheritance in Java, so we use the extends keyword. And whenever we are talking about interface, like when we are going to use the interface and when we are going to use the extend keyword, because when you talked about the different types of inheritance in object oriented programming language, so as we have seen that we are having a single level, we are having multi-level, we are having multiple, we are having hybrid, we are having hierarchical inheritance, but all those inheritance are not supported in Java, right? So in order to achieve all these inheritance, so some of the inheritance we can achieve by means of the extends keyword, and some of the inheritance we can going to achieve by means of the interface. So whenever we are going to use the interface, we are supposed to use the keyword implements, right? Then what is inherited? Then in Java, a class is extended, subclass inherits all the public, protected and default, right, methods and fields of the superclass. Whereas what is not inherited? Private fields and methods of the superclass are not inherited by the subclass, right? Means whenever we are declaring anything as a private, so that thing cannot be inherited in a subclass of the child class. Constructor of the superclass are not inherited. That we are going to see practically, because when I will be covering this access specifiers, so these things will be much more clear. Then the syntax for the inheritance. So as I said that, let's say we are having some parent class, right? From the parent class, we are now deriving the child class. So we are writing the class subclass name and extends the superclass name, right? Because above this, we are having one parent class or the superclass, and from that superclass, we are inheriting the child class. And in order to do that, we will be using the extends keyword, right? So the class super and class sub is extending the super. So the moment we are writing this particular thing, it does mean that this sub is going to have all the features of the super class, right? So it is going to have the user relationship. For example, if I'm talking about a vehicle class, and if I'm saying that I'm having a two-wheeler, I'm having a four-wheeler, and if I'm talking about the relationship between this, so my vehicle is a parent class or the super class, whereas four-wheeler is extending the vehicle. Then two-wheeler is also extending the vehicle. That is, four-wheeler is a vehicle, two-wheeler is also a vehicle, and car extends the four-wheeler. So car is a four-wheeler, right? So it is forming a user relationship, right? So how it is it so? That is, if I'm talking about this, so from this we can conclude like that vehicle is a super class, that is the base class, and from vehicle we are deriving the four-wheeler. So we can say that the four-wheeler is a subclass which is derived from the vehicle. And when I'm talking about the relationship between the car and the four-wheeler, so we can say that four-wheeler is the parent class, whereas the car is the child class, because car is getting derived from the four-wheeler, that is the parent class, right? Then public vehicle is a relationship, two-wheeler is a vehicle, four-wheeler is a vehicle, car is a four-wheeler, and hence car is a vehicle, right? So we can conclude like this. So hope it is clear, right? Then yes, one more, that is if I'm talking about animal and the different types of animal categories. So the class animal is the parent or the super class. Then public class mammal, right, which is extending from the animal. Then reptile is also extending the animal. Then dog is extending the mammal. So how we can relate that animal, then mammal, then the dog. So likewise, what we can say, dog is a mammal and dog is animal, right? So we can now have the is a relationship. If at all we are having a multiple no derivation, that is a parent class, child class, then child class, but still those will be related to each other. Means in other words, what we can say that if suppose I am creating the object for the dog, so dog can acquire the properties of the mammal as well as dog can acquire the properties of the animal, because dog is ultimately the animal, right? So based on to this example, no, we can conclude like that the animal is a superclass of the mammal class, animal is superclass of reptile class, mammal and reptile are the subclass of animal class, and likewise mammal is an animal, reptile is an animal, and hence dog is an animal as well. Dog is a mammal as well as dog is animal. Means what? Dog can acquire the properties of mammal and dog also can acquire the properties of animal, right? So with the use of the extends keyword, the subclasses will be able to inherit all the properties of the superclass, right? Except from the private properties of the superclass, right? There is an exception. That is what, whenever defining any data members or the member function as a private, so those things will not be accessible inside the derived class or in the child class. And just keep this thing in very important, and just be sure about this thing, that parent class is nothing but the base class is nothing but the super class, right? Or also called as no, that is a super class, right? Whereas child class is also called as a derived class or also called as a subclass, right? And yes, so that's it regarding the introduction to the inheritance. In the next class, we'll be starting with the actual programming, that how exactly we are going to use the Java in order to implement the inheritance. And also we are going to discuss the different types of inheritance which the Java is supporting. And also we are going to support our examples with the help of some programming, right? So that's it for this particular class. See you in the next class. Thank you.